a woman calls up, and it's probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. She's afraid to actually go over and answer the door or see who it is. She kind of peers out the window. She sees it's a man, but really can't see who it is. He's walking back to the car. But then she says, but he's getting in his trunk. And then he brings out a backpack and then walks back over towards the house. She's saying he's setting my house on fire.
Welcome to Critical Incidents Podcast, where we explore life-defining moments. I'm your host, Kyle Ashley, a law enforcement veteran with over a decade of experience. Each episode, I'll be interviewing people about their own critical incident, a moment in their lives that shaped who they are today. From life-threatening emergencies to personal struggles, we'll hear firsthand accounts of resilience, determination, and the power of the human spirit. So sit back and let's dive into the critical incidents that shaped their lives and made them who they are.
My name is Brandon Hall. I work with the Metro Nashville Department of Emergency Communications, and my critical incident is the Christmas Day bombing.
All right, Brandon, so tell us why you wanted to get into dispatching.
I actually started dispatching when I was 20 years old. It actually just kind of fell in my lap, kind of in a way. I had been working, believe it or not, in a tuxedo shop. It was a tuxedo and costume shop. We did a little bit of both. And I was supposed to go to Scotland on a vacation. And literally days before it happened, my boss said, "I'm sorry, we just had somebody quit. I can't let you take the time off." And I'd already paid for the tickets and everything. So I was like, no, I'm not going to waste this trip on a job like this. So I went ahead and took it. And I said, all right, just go ahead and fire me or whatever you have to do, but I'm going on the trip. So after I got back, I started looking for stuff and talked to my dad, and he was a sheriff's deputy here in Nashville, which the roles are a little bit different than a lot of other deputies here in Nashville. It's more of a jail guard, and they serve civil warrants, and that's really about all they do. So he knew several people that worked in the same county I work in. And he said, well, we're looking for 911 dispatchers, and I think you might actually have the kind of right temperament for the job. I said, I'll give it a shot. And a couple of weeks later, that's where I was at. I was in class and learning how to do the job. And then I just started my whole training journey. And 23 years later, I'm here.
Wow. Tuxedo shop. That's pretty interesting. That's a career jump right there from tuxedos and costumes to dispatching.
Yeah, it really is. I had no idea I was going to do that. And the only reason I was at the tuxedo shop because at the time my aunt was working there as a seamstress, and she said they needed some salesmen out on the floor and people to just kind of help out in general. And like I said, I think I was maybe 18 when I started there, 18, 19, and I was there for a little bit over a year. And yeah, I mean, it was fun, but that wasn't a career. That's not where you want to end up at.
You get into dispatch pretty young when you start dispatching. Tell us about the first few years of dispatching. How does that go for you?
So when you start out with dispatch in general, it's kind of like, well, it's kind of, but not quite the same as what you would go through in a police academy. We'll have several weeks of in-class training where they teach you all the computer systems, kind of the general knowledge of what you're going to have to go through on the telephones. And then from there, you're actually set with a trainer on rotating shifts for 3 months. You cover every angle, and, they're sitting right beside you the whole time. I kind of made it through a little bit more fast than most other people did. I made it through that phase in about a month and a half, and I was released early. And then a little ways later, they get you into the actual radio dispatch training, 2 weeks in class, and another 3 months. I was released early again. And that just kind of carries you through your first year while you're there. And as we were talking off air, one of the things that kind of sticks out with you is the first month that you're in training, you just remember almost everything that happened that month. It's crazy that it's been nearly a quarter of a century, and I can still very vividly remember some of the calls I took back then.
Absolutely. I think that it's really cool when we were talking before this recording started that, you brought up a good point where I don't know exactly every single call I've been on in the past week, but I can tell you I have so much more vivid memories of the first few months to like the year that I started as a police officer, and you do the same as being a dispatcher. It's really interesting that that is what stuck with us, is more vivid memories than what we continue to do now. It almost seems like you don't get numb to it, but your mind doesn't, you know, continue to capture those moments the way that we used to.
Well, it's such a shock for you when you first start doing it. It's something that if you really think about in movies or something, they'll give you a watered down version of what's really happening in the world. And then when you experience it, you sight and hands on, and me listening to it as soon as it comes in, as soon as it happens, that type thing. It's really a lot different than anything that the movie or TV can really portray.
It sure does. And especially, man, just listening to your voice, I can imagine that callers from 911, when they hear your voice, they're like, oh man, this is like such a soothing voice. You got this deep voice. Has anyone ever said anything to you about that when being on 911?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Multiple times. It's, I've had old women call me sweet, and younger women do the same thing. And, but it just really depends on what kind of emergency they're having too. If they're in a really life and death type thing, I think you could have just about anybody on the telephone. They don't really care. They're not listening to that so much as they're hearing the questions, but they don't really care who's taking the call.
All right. So you go through these first year, couple years, and I think it progressed a little bit further into your career, and you ran into a critical incident. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, one of the ones, again, we were talking about off air, it's actually in my first month. One of the ones that kind of jumped out at me was, I was on the phone. I still had a trainer at that point, and a woman calls up, and it's probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. She says that there's somebody that's at her door and has been knocking and really banging on her door for the past 10, 15 minutes. She's afraid to actually go over and answer the door or see who it is. And for good reason. I mean, you think about it, no one is supposed to come knocking on your door at 3 or 4 a.m. So she kind of peers out the window. She sees it's a man, but really can't see who it is. And as he's still continuing to knock, you can tell that she's really getting more and more scared. And then she says, okay, he's walking back. There's a car in my driveway. He's walking back to the car. But then she says, but he's getting in his trunk. And then he brings out a backpack and then walks back over towards the house, starts walking around the house really slowly with the backpack in his hands. And then she's like, I can't see him. I don't know what's going on. And the next thing she does is it's almost like a scream, but it's kind of subdued. It's really quiet. She's saying, he's setting my house on fire. And as soon as that happens, of course I perk up. I don't know what to do at this point. This woman's in a burning house, and there's a person outside willing to burn her house down, possibly with her in it. So I don't know whether to send her outside to the place where this guy is that's walking around that may be wanting to do her harm, or to leave her inside this burning house. So I'm kind of stuck in that position. I just have to wait for a minute. And luckily he walked back and got into his car and drove off. And at that point I said, get out of the house. Just get out of the house right now. She walks outside, and as this car is peeling off down the road, she sees the car, recognizes the car. Apparently she had some sort of a workplace dispute with a couple guys that she works with, and they were both in the car. And I guess it was bad enough that they thought, okay, let's just set her house on fire, or worse. I don't know.
That's so intense to think about in the aspect of taking a phone call, right? So as a dispatcher, I can imagine that having the panic in someone's voice and hearing them go through a situation where someone is lighting their house on fire, right, is going to, like, do you get like a certain adrenaline dump from that? Because you're on the other receiving end of, like, someone's asking you for help over the phone. So it's not like you can just hop in your car and go down there. You have to dispatch people to that. But walk me through, like, what you're thinking, what you're feeling.
Well, at that point, I was still pretty new. I mean, if something like that were to happen today, probably be fine with it and just after the call's over with, go directly on to the next call with no pause or anything. So, and I know that's one of the things that I'm sure with me and you, after you do something enough times, it just becomes kind of a routine, which it sounds, I don't want to say heartless, but it sounds a little bit like maybe you should put a little bit more effort or thought or compassion into it, whatever like that. Really, if it's a true emergency type situation, you want somebody who's just calculated, someone who knows what to do, and it is routine to them, so they can get through it and do it as quickly and as effectively as possible. But yeah, back then, yeah, I got the big adrenaline boost and everything there for a few minutes, and I didn't really know what to do at that point. It was the same thing. I was going to tell you, one of the other cases that I helped out on initially and this is really terrible. It was a woman who calls in and she said that she had just got out of a situation where she was duct taped, raped, and held at knife point, then robbed of all of her credit cards and her money. And she was about my age. She was went to one of the local colleges here, and luckily she knew who it was. It was a maintenance man at her apartment complex, and they found him a few minutes later because he was trying to cash out some of her credit cards in an ATM. But me at that point, kind of like you were saying, you want to get up and rush out there. I felt like this woman needed some extra help, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Do I need to just sit here? Do I want to go out and talk to her, calm her down? I don't know what to do. So, and luckily my trainer at that point says, no, this is your role in it. This is where you end. So I got past that little part, and as hard as it was initially, I had to come to terms with the fact that that's my part. That's all I do. Somebody else is going to handle the rest of it.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I don't think that I've ever really taken the time to think about the role of a dispatcher as after they hang up the phone. I think that there's something to be said, because you obviously have emotions when you're taking these calls. And so you're going to hear them going through something, whether it's an emotional thing that's happening, it's a crime that's occurring. You can hear crimes on the phone all the time. And then your role ends essentially when you hang up the phone. And I don't think I've ever really thought of it like that. So that happens with all of them, doesn't it? Do you ever have like a different perspective after the fact that you get to meet these people or see them or find out what happened?
That is extremely, extremely rare. I was just talking to somebody the other day, talking about how many calls I've probably handled in the entire time I've been there, 23 years, anywhere from probably 100 to 300 calls in one way that I either took myself or handled on the radio end of it. And I've probably taken over 1 million calls. And in all that time, I think I may have met one or two people, and not even there at dispatch, just out being somewhere, and they'll say, oh, I think I may have talked to you on 911. And it was, just for some sort of routine, mundane type call. But for the most part, yeah, it's, you don't meet people. You never see them face to face. You don't know what they look like, unless they show up on the news or something like that. You don't get that part of it. And a lot of people say, how do you deal with the closure? And I'm like, well, once you come to terms that is all you're doing, and there's other people waiting on you to answer the phone, that's what you have to do. I mean, you just have to be okay with it.
That's right. There are so many people. I think that it is underestimated by a lot of people how many calls go into 911 or non-emergency every day. I think that it's really an eye-opening experience. For me, when I first became a police officer, I thought it was like cops, right? Like, oh, there is this period in time in one night where one thing might happen, but the rest of the time you might be just driving around waiting for, a traffic violation to happen. But once I became a police officer, I realized that it is nonstop. There's so much crime that occurs, or the person that calls is thinking that a crime is actually being committed when most of the time it's not. But a lot more happens in a jurisdiction than what people realize.
Absolutely. Every single day, like I said, I'll take myself, and I'm usually on my shift at work, there's somewhere around anywhere from 25 to 30, 35 people on a shift. And each of us are dealing with one way or another, probably, like I said, between 100 and 300 calls in a day. And most people think, okay, they see on the news, like, oh, there was a shooting somewhere. It was, over in a housing project or something like that. Or there was a DUI arrest of some semi-famous person or something along that lines. And they think, oh, that's the extent of the crime. No, it's just like you said, it's happening all the time. It's everywhere. It's a beer run at a gas station. It's a shoplifting at Walmart. It's someone who's woke up this morning and pissed off that their wife made them runny eggs or whatever like that and starts beating on them. There's anything you can think of. It's happening, and it's happening all the time.
Nonstop. It's really eye opening. I think that if people could do a ride along with a dispatcher, they would be so open to how many calls actually occur. And I think that's really cool. I think it's a cool perspective to see. So you talk about these experiences, and something that recently occurred in 2020. You were a part of this.
Yeah. So with that, it was the Christmas Day bombing. It was pretty insane the way that worked. I'm sure that you, over the years, at some point have worked at Christmas Day, and really Christmas Day is one of the slower days of the year. It might be kind of opposite of what a lot of people would think, but for the most part, there's not a lot of people out on the roads. There's not a lot of the stores are not open, so there's no shoplifting. It's just a slow day. So I when I have to work on Christmas days, I enjoy it because it's just really relaxed and there's not a lot going on. I walk in that day, and my shift starts at 6:30 in the morning. And usually when I walk in, everybody's just, they're finishing up the midnight shift. There's not a lot of calls coming in because it's really early in the morning, and everybody's just kind of relaxed. And that day I walk in and people are up walking around, and there's a lot of talk going on. And I had a radio assignment that day. So I'll walk over, and my radio assignment's what we call the countywide dispatch. We handle all the kind of excess things, detectives, bomb squad, any type of extra units over patrol. We would pretty much handle those on the countywide radio. And the guy that I'm relieving, I was like, what's going on, man? Why are all the people up and walking around and stuff? And he goes, well, there's been a RV park downtown on 2nd Avenue, and it's been playing a message saying that there's a bomb about to go off. And then as he's saying that, he pauses for a second, puts his finger up to his headset, and he says, and it just blew up. So at that point, I was like, all right, let's just, go ahead and let me jump in here and get going. You can go on home, and I'll deal with the rest of it. And just for the rest of the day, it was nonstop. It was insane. And it lasted. I mean, truth be told, to this day, 2nd Avenue, there's still a lot of it that hasn't been repaired. It's still completely demolished buildings down there. And I'm not sure if some of them are ever going to get repaired, but it just, the backstory to it is even more insane when they started looking into it. Luckily, it was just one guy who decided to drive an RV downtown, and he was somehow had a connection with AT&T. He parked his RV that was full of bombs in front of the AT&T main junction building, blew it up in the hopes that it would disrupt or completely disable all the phone systems for AT&T in the Southeast. And he kind of accomplished that, but he did it in a way that he was going to kill himself inside the vehicle as well. The message he had playing on the outside was to have everybody evacuate. So he actually did not want a lot of casualties. He picked the right time to do it when there would be very few people out at all. Nobody's out in downtown now, especially because people have started migrating to Nashville. Hardly anybody's actually still from Nashville, like a Nashville native. So everybody leaves and goes back home for the holidays. So there was really not that many people there. And he was the only person that died. And it was a huge explosion. There were a few minor injuries past that, and 60 something buildings were damaged or demolished. It was pretty incredible.
That is intense. An explosion that I couldn't imagine, man. And so, gosh, as a dispatcher, I'm sure that you have to field so many calls from people who are calling in saying, my car was blown up, or, the building I worked in, I have to go check on it now. And can I go there? I'm sure. What kind of calls did you get from that?
Yeah, actually, I was going to say that day I barely took any calls because I was on the radio the whole time dispatching. I was having to get in contact with just about everybody you can think of. I mean, FBI, ATF, any alphabet agency you can think of, they were there. And I was calling each one of those agencies trying to get them there and get that moving. The days after really is when we started receiving the phone calls. Other than the initial calls about the explosion itself, later on in the day and then days after that, people were calling in saying, okay, I've got a relative that lives in Nashville. Are they safe? Or I need to go back down to the area I live there and I need to get some stuff out. Can I go? Just lots of what you would consider, well, I won't say routine calls because you got, a block in Nashville that's completely destroyed and past that to really a lot more. But it's just kind of normal calls like that people were calling in, just really wanting to check in with loved ones and family members, friends, whatever they could, just trying to find out if they were safe or not.
Yeah, I can imagine you probably get a whole bunch of those calls. And I would assume just in the years after that you probably get a lot of calls for RVs parked downtown anywhere. And hey, you might want to come in the police check on this. This RV's been parked here for a while. Do you ever get those calls?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And what's actually even more weird than that, the exact same day that happened, that Christmas Day, in a neighboring county, they had some guy who he was, I won't say he was trying to be a copycat, but he took advantage of this situation. He had some sort of I guess probably like an old U-Haul truck or something like that. It was an old box truck. And he was driving down one of our highways. Like I said, it's a neighboring county, but out in a rural area. And he set up some PA speakers in the back of it saying something along the lines of the same thing, that the box truck's going to blow up and things like that. So everybody down in that area was calling. And this was in the middle of the day. This wasn't like really early in the morning, like the one in Nashville. So they ended up surrounding him. There was no bombs, no nothing like that. He was just trying to get a rise out of people. And of course that didn't work out too well for him.
Yeah, I'm sure that didn't. I can imagine the police probably swooped in and took care of that real quick.
Oh yeah, they had the whole thing surrounded. They kept a very big area blocked off because they didn't want to take any chances with him. And I kind of equate that guy to kind of the same type of thing that happened. I'm not sure if you were working during 9/11 or not, but I worked the afternoon of 9/11, and of course that happened Washington D.C. and New York. And I thought, we're not going to have anything from this. And when I got into work that day, we had extra security there and they were checking everybody's badges like really closely, make sure that we were who we say we are. And then the calls start flooding in. It's like, that was like ringing the dinner bell for any crazies that are out there that had some sort of a beef with America. Everybody at all that, might have some sort of a dislike for the way we do things at all, they call in and say that they're going to blow up some building in Nashville, or they're going to blow up a Walmart, or they're going to kill people, whatever like that. It was all day or all afternoon long, like that, call after call, hundreds of them with people like that.
When there's a national emergency, so whenever we have a national emergency, you're spot on with that. We get so many different calls about something that may be related to something that occurred across the country, and people that are like, you will either be in support of it, or they will be so fearful that it may be occurring here, and it's important. Obviously, we still have to go respond to it. You still got to take the phone call from it. And I think it's really interesting that the overall picture of what happens with the nation that hits the news is affected no matter where you are in the country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I've talked with dispatchers from all over that worked that day, and they were experiencing the same thing. Some people were calling in because, just like you said, they were in fear that something was going to happen, but the majority of it was someone who just really was nuts and had a beef with their town or America in general would call in and they would make a threat. They would make a bomb threat or whatever, saying that they were going to do it too.
Yeah. Which is scary, by the way, very scary to have that, I'm sure, especially on your end, if people are calling in and saying those things. Yeah,
absolutely. It's horrible. I mean, and of course, none of them were founded, but at the same time, it overworked everybody because between us, the police department, fire department, we had to go out and check every single one of these.
Yeah, that's also true. One thing that is really interesting that I learned, and it just as well as I do, is that even if you take the phone call, the 911 call, You have to dispatch it because even though you might think in your head and you might know almost for a fact because you have your frequent flyers of people that they always call in about the same thing, that you still have to dispatch the police or fire an EMS or whatever, needs to go out there. You have to. And I think it's like a liability issue that you can't just put this call off because you think this person may be going through a mental health crisis. You think it's fake. You think that, this is the third call you've had by the same person every day. You still have to send someone out there. And so we have those happen all the time. And I'm sure you have them probably even more where you live.
Oh, yeah. It's, I say we have our people that have mental illnesses, things like that. And some of them, just like you said, frequent flyers, we know. And just one of them off the top of my head that happened years and years ago, it was a woman who, and I felt horrible for her because she would call in saying that her husband was beating her and she was crying. I mean, this was just horrible for her. She could barely even catch her breath half the time while she's on the phone. And of course, the first few times we'd send police out there. And her husband, there's no way he could beat her. They're both elderly and he was bedridden. There's no way that he could even get out of bed to do this. But in her head, this was actually happening. So, after a while, you can't keep on responding to stuff like that. But one day she called in and she was not crying anymore. And she says, "Don't worry, it's okay now. I fixed it." So I was like, at that point, I was like, okay, something's wrong. And I sent the police out for that, and they got out there, and she had stabbed him with an ice pick. And again, like dispatch, like in normal dispatch setting, I have no idea what happened after that. I think they may have taken her to a mental facility, but I don't know. I'm not even sure if the husband lived or died.
Man, and that's so. I wish there was more of an opportunity to tell stories like that because that happens more often than we realize. And I think that it is more prevalent around the country just based on the people that I encounter. And I know that you encounter because we can talk to each other. Like you're a dispatcher, you work in, public service, you're a first responder. And the more people we get to know in the community of this, you realize of how the same things that occur in your jurisdiction occur in other jurisdictions and how these situations are even more prevalent across the country. I think it's really interesting, and it opens my eyes, at least when I hear these things and think, oh man, like this happens here where I work, and it also happens even more in other places because your jurisdiction is massive. I'm sure I don't know how many people live in Nashville, but millions, I can assume.
Well, during the day, the actual population is actually only about 675,000 or so people, or at night, I should have said, that's how many people sleep here at night. But during the day, when everybody commutes in from outside the counties, it can swell up to 1.5 million or so. And in the metro area in general, it's probably, I'd say in the 2 to 3 million range with all the surrounding counties.
Yeah, which is massive jurisdiction for anybody to try to police and try to take 911 calls from.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It can get beyond hectic. It's every single day, but like I said, and kind of like you experience, it becomes routine. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah. There's not a lot of time to process things between calls. And I think that you made a really good point where when you do take a call, right? So whether it's me responding to it or you talking to them on the phone, when your part is done, you pick up the pieces and you move on to the next one. And sometimes it's, obviously it's harder with certain calls. I might go to a DOA. So like, grandma or grandpa passed away in their sleep and you got to work that. And then the next call you go to is a motor vehicle accident. And then the next call you go to is a robbery in progress. And so you're doing those not simultaneously, but right after another. So like, as you're trying to finish up your report for one, dispatch is already online saying, hey, I need you to go to this robbery, or I need you to go to this, larceny from a Walmart. And so the same for you guys as it is for police, it's just one after the other. You pick up what you got and you'll process it at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's exactly like that. In fact, one of my supervisors had to stop me at one point and question me about something that I had taken because I went straight from one call to the next, just like normal. And it turned out that like the one that she was questioning me on was it was a woman who called in. And, that's one of the things about dispatching is that a lot of times, and I'm sure that for some officers it works the same way, but a lot of times for dispatchers, if you've been there for any length of time, you're going to be the last person that your caller talks to before they die, depending on how it is. And a lot of times it's suicide. And that's what happened with this one. Was a woman called in and she says, I live at this place. I'm going to kill myself. You can find me in the backyard. Tell my husband I'm sorry. And then I hear a gunshot, and that's all it was. And, for me with something like that, they've told us over the years, and I found it to be completely true. If someone calls in and they say, I'm feeling kind of bad. I'm depressed. I'm thinking about killing myself. Yes, they're depressed. That's absolutely accurate. They're just not going to kill themselves. It's not going to happen. They're thinking about it. They're wanting help. The people who are really going to do it, they will call in and tell you where they're at, what they're going to do. And, they'll say, you can find me at so-and-so place. And that's what happened with this woman. But because of that, I knew there was nothing I could do about the situation. You're not going to stop this person. And granted, I tried to keep her on the phone, but she'd already set it down at that point, and I knew that there was nothing else I could do. So my conscience was clear. I didn't feel bad about it. So once the officer got there and I heard him walk up and get on this radio saying he's got a GSW to the head, I clicked off and went to the next call. I mean, just like it's normal, which, like I said, it was.
Yeah. And that's the unfortunate reality that you deal with and being a first responder and working in public service. And when you mention that, obviously taking the phone calls where someone wants to, take their own life, is there any kind of specialty training that you go through? I know for the police department, and I think this was kind of implemented nationwide, they started a crisis intervention type of training. It's a week-long training, 40 hours that we go through. And I want to say that it's been implemented nationwide. Do you go through any of that at training where it kind of like talks about, mirroring what people are saying and trying to reflect on what they're doing to try to talk them out of these situations?
Yeah. We've had several different classes like that. I can't recall when the last one we had was that it was a kind of a modified negotiator training almost. And, because a lot of the same tools are used with that. So, that was probably a few years ago when we had that one, but we'll have little updates and things like that we'll go through tests or refreshers, things of that nature that'll kind of keep us on our game with that.
Absolutely. So before we get into the podcast, right? So you have your own podcast and I want you to talk about that in a minute. But before we get into that part of it, what I want to talk about is the latest episode you had that I listened to. Just a quick overview of what I took from that is it was a dispatcher who got the phone call that there was a woman that was watching a live stream of a service, a church service, and there was a rabbi up there, and then someone came in and they started yelling at the rabbi. And so she called 911 and was like, hey, this shouldn't be happening, right? I'm watching this live stream in my church service. My rabbi has, stepped away from the podium and they're getting yelled at. And it seems like it's a disturbance happening. So they called 911 and you placed the audio into this. And one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I wanted you to kind of explain, is that during the WAV file, or right, the audio recording of it, it's the dispatcher is essentially she is trying to gain control of the situation, and it sounds like she's yelling at the caller to like be quiet so that she can hear what's going on. And so I can't imagine, right, trying to gain control of a situation just over the phone. I think that would be very difficult to do. And listening to your podcast and listening to these audio files of dispatchers talking, sometimes it sounds like they are, and I'm not going to say mean, but it's trying to gain control of the situation. Can you kind of explain that in how you and your experience utilize talking with people when you need to get the information and you want to relay how important that is to get that information?
Yeah, and actually the one you're talking about, it's, believe it or not, flip the script a little bit. That was actually the caller, because she was trying to listen to the live stream to see what they were saying. She was actually the one saying, be quiet. And she kind of jumped over, but we're the same kind of way, not necessarily like screaming. But it really depends on the situation. If it's a something that's not that big of a deal. And we'll have people, and I'm sure you've responded, that they'll be a, younger female or something like that, and she's gotten her first car wreck. There's nothing wrong with her physically. It's just her car that's been messed up, and they'll be crying, and it's hard to calm them down from it. There's, that's their emergency for the day. That's probably the biggest thing they've ever had to deal with, even though it's not that big of a deal. But in something like that, you can take your time a little bit more with it. It's not that time sensitive. So you just kind of roll through the blows with it and just let them go through the call. As long as you get your questions answered, not a big deal. But if you get something that's very time sensitive, if you have something like CPR that's in progress or something along that line, I mean, it's seconds count. Same thing like that, strokes, heart attacks, a shooting, anything like that. You have to get the stuff right then and there. And I don't know what a good, well, I'll give you kind of an example. It was a woman who called in, and she was an elderly woman. And she said that she has, walked into the room and found her husband laying dead on the bed. And at that point, when we realized that he's not breathing, he's not conscious, and we're still thinking it may be a workable arrest, something like that, we have to really get them into gear and say, well, ma'am, look, this is a very serious situation. If we want to try to help him, we need to do it right now, this second. And with a CPR, when you start doing that over the telephone, you can't have them on the bed, because if you start trying to do chest compressions, it's just going to bounce them down, up and down on the bed. They're not going to get any actual pressure on their chest like they need to. So you have to get them on the floor. And, this woman, she was a smaller woman, and like I said, elderly. And I was trying to tell her, I said, look, get him on the ground, grab his arm, pull him off. Don't worry about the fall. It's not going to hurt him. And, she's like, I just can't do it. And I said, well, ma'am, at this point, we need to do everything we can. I don't really care if you get on the bed and kick him off on the floor. We have to get this done. And I mean, that's what she ended up doing, is she got on the bed and just pushed him off with her feet, and she was able to do that and started CPR. But it turned out that most people don't know this. CPR on TV, everybody thinks that it's just a real easy and effective way to do things. CPR is only effective about 5% of the time. So he was already too far gone. There was, she tried to help him, and I'm very glad that she did that. But sometimes you have to really get in there and say something to get their attention, to draw them back into what's going on and what they need to do. And it's kind of hard to listen to sometimes, but like I said before, like earlier on in the episode, that we have to do these things. It's, the routine part of it. You want somebody who knows how to do these things, that can get it done and get it done quickly. I mean, I'd rather have a friend or a loved one who is alive, and the person on the other end of the phone maybe say, okay, well, they could have been a little bit more compassionate. Okay, well, you can save compassion for later. We want to save a life. You've got to get it done right now, and you'll be compassionate afterwards.
That is so important. It's one of those things that I don't think is not compassion. I think that the compassion comes from the how important the issue is that you're facing. So, having to tell someone, listen, you got to do this. There's no other choice. Like, you have to do this. And whatever way you say that, if it's saving a life, is the compassion that goes into it. So I agree with you 100%. I think that when it comes to being in this line of work, right, it's being a dispatcher or a first responder in any way, it's not necessarily the way that you're saying things. It's the information that you need to put out. And I'm glad that you clarified that, because I only imagine, right? I'm not a dispatcher. I don't know all of the calls. I'm sure it's a lot more than what I would even begin to process, because I only take a handful of calls. But going through so many of those, you have to gain control of the situation. You have to make sure that someone who is seeing a critical incident occur in their face, you have to then walk them through how to successfully give CPR, or apply pressure for a gunshot wound, or, leave a burning building or not leave a burning building. So I can only imagine what you would have to do to gain control of that, so that they survive the situation or help someone else survive. So that's a really cool way of telling me exactly how that's done. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's the same. I can't remember what your all's the workup is for you when you ask someone first, and then you tell them, and then I can't remember what the steps are, but it's kind of the same way for us. You try to remain calm, And if that works, great. If not, you jump up a little bit more, and you use different tactics, repetitive persistence, things like that to try to get their attention. And like I said before, I'd rather sound rude on the telephone and save a life than sound nice on the telephone and not.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that when we talk about gaining compliance over something, if we match the same level that we're at, we're not going to gain any ground. You have to go one step above that to gain what you need to gain. So that's a really important part of that. So you got a podcast. Know that we got to meet at CrimeCon in Vegas, right? This is a lot of cool things that went on there. So it was really cool to meet you there and, listening to your podcast. So can you tell us about your podcast and what's going on with it?
So my podcast is called Music City 911. It's named after the nickname for Nashville, Music City. And I started the podcast up a little bit over 3 years ago. And at the time, I started out thinking, it's going to be more of a police and dispatch type podcast, just kind of a buddy type show. Me and a coworker of mine who had just retired from up there at dispatch. He'd worked there for 40 years. And at the time, I'd been there for about 20. And, really good friends with him. We started out doing the show like that. And, it was fun. It was a lot of fun, but he had retired and, he wanted to be fully retired. He had no idea how much time and effort it took to actually make a podcast. And, I just kind of kept going with it. And I have had to teach myself how to do everything. Didn't really know how to record that well. Didn't know what kind of equipment to use. And, it's just kind of molded itself into what it is now. And it started out, like I said, kind of more of a police buddy type show. And now it's kind of a mixture of true crime and dispatch end of it. So I've always said I try to educate and entertain with the show. That way people can keep coming back and listen, and they will know what to expect when they get on the phone with 911. God forbid if they ever have to call that 911 in a case like that.
Yes, absolutely. And it is very educational. It's so cool to hear the perspective of professionals that work in those careers, because it's important to understand the realm in which your expertise is coming from, because it is, even though me and you may work in the same field, right? So we're both first responders, we both work in public service. Our domains are completely different, but they're also connected. And it's really cool to hear your side of that and to hear that from your podcast. It's I highly recommend the podcast. Just listening to it the other day, that episode we were talking about, me and Heather were listening to it and we thought it was great. I mean, the audio quality is fantastic and the stories are very captivating and informal. So kudos to you on that. I know that we have a lot of mutual friends and always say great things about that.
Oh yeah. Thank you. I'm glad to keep doing it, and I hope to continue doing it. Maybe move it into a full-time gig at some point. That's kind of a dream of mine.
Absolutely. I think that's a good aspiration to do. And I think you're well on your way to doing that. And I'd want to thank you for coming on to this podcast. I think a lot of information is covered on here that is going to be informal for people to listen to. And so I appreciate you coming on.
Oh yeah. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure and a lot of fun.
To be a guest on the show, please email CriticalIncidentsPod@gmail.com. Until next time, stay safe.